All right, Emily. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Nick Larigakis, president of the American Hellenic Institute, and on behalf of the American Hellenic Institute, a nonprofit, independent Greek-American public policy and advocacy center here in Washington, D.C., it is my pleasure to present our first virtual two-day conference to commemorate the bicentennial of Greek independence. We have proudly organized two panels, each one comprised of three presentations by noted academicians and AHI's leadership, to examine our conference's overarching theme, the United States and the Greek War of Independence. The conference will take place in two sessions over 2 days. Our second session will take place tomorrow. Ancient Greece gave birth to the ideas and principles that are the foundation of Western democracies. As such, all Americans share in the Hellenic spirit, which is embedded in the DNA of our Constitution and at the core of our cherished liberties. As Americans of Greek heritage, we take special pride in the success of our great nation, knowing that these Hellenic principles have provided the basis for the unprecedented prosperity of our country. The American Revolution was inspired by the same ideas of the Enlightenment, which inspired the Greek War of Independence. The American people manifested their adherence to these ideas through their ardent, vocal, and humanitarian support for the Greek cause. The celebration of Greek independence is an important reminder for free citizens around the world. Hellenism and the rule of law must be defended, or else we can expect the slow erosion of the very principles that provide the underpinning of our society. Today's expert presenters will take a deeper dive into these broad themes with presentations that will provide us with the perspective in which the Greek War of Independence took place, enlighten us about the contributions of the American Philhellenes of 1821 and how these shared principles and ideas translate to contemporary government and the enactment of policy. However, before we commence with our panel, we are thrilled and excited to present two accomplished, distinguished individuals to open up our virtual conference. First, to start us off with a welcome for this conference is our own conference chairman, Professor Dr. Alexandra Kitroeff, who has helped guide us through the process over the course of the many months that we've been organizing this conference. And Professor, we thank you very much for your invaluable assistance and guidance. Professor Kitroeff serves currently at Harvard College outside of Philadelphia. He's on sabbatical currently in Greece, and he comes to us live from Greece. His research and publishing focuses on nationalism and ethnicity in modern Greece and the diaspora, but more importantly, he's also a very ardent and diehard Panathinaikos fan. So, Professor Kitroeff, we welcome you and look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Nick, for that generous introduction and the mention of the soccer team. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Good evening, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are throughout the world. This conference is one of many events that are happening in the United States and in Greece, especially over these 2 weeks, which mark the bicentennial of the Greek War of Independence, the Greek Revolution. May I say that this particular conference, among all the other events that are taking place, is distinguished and unique in itself because it's doing two things at the same time. It's exploring the connections between Greece and the United States, both during the 1820s and the legacy of those connections between Greece and the United States as they unfolded after the victory of the Greek Revolution. And it's also tying in this US-Greek connection to policy concerns, which is, of course, AHI's special concern. So this is a conference that is an interface between academic study and policy implementation. In a sense, we're gathering over these 2 days to honor the Greek revolutionaries that fought for Greek freedom, to honor the Americans who also, through the Philhellenic movement, supported Greece, honor the Americans who were inspired by Greece and who inspired Greece during this successful Greek Revolution that began in 1821. To honor is also to celebrate, but it's also an opportunity to reflect, to think critically about the past, and reflecting on the past will help us look ahead to the future of Greek-American relations. And with that, I thank you and I welcome every one of you to our 2-day conference.
Thank you, Professor Kitroeff. And now, no stranger she to any of our Zoom presentations here at the American Hellenic Institute, the very distinguished and esteemed Ambassador of Greece to the United States, Alexandra Papadopoulou, who, as I understand it, is given at least one of these presentations a day to commemorate the 1821 200 bicentennial of Greek independence in America. I will not, again, get into a long background, but she's had a very distinguished career in the Greek Foreign Service. I'll just mention a couple of her more pronounced posts as Deputy Permanent Representative of Greece to the United Nations, Ambassador of Greece to the United Nations, Permanent Representative of Greece to the European Union, Ambassador of Greece to Uruguay and Paraguay, and just before she came to Washington to head up her most recent assignment, she was head of the diplomatic cabinet, Prime Minister Mitsotakis. So as always, it's always a great pleasure to see you, Madam Ambassador. We thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and we look forward to your greetings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Larigakis. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. It is an honor to offer some remarks at the beginning of an event to which a lot of effort and a lot of time was put. And thank you and your collaborators for having the initiative to get together so many distinguished scholars and distinguished individuals who can offer their insight into the war of liberation, of Greek liberation, and what it means. My remarks are structured around the same points that Dr. Kitroeff made just a few seconds ago. Maybe it's because I heard his lecture, or maybe because I think that for all of us who dwell on the 200th year of Greek liberation, it's what we think and what we feel this celebration should be all about. First of all, it's a celebration about honoring all those who gave their lives back in 1821 all the way to 1828, which was practically the end of the Greek War of Independence, but also honoring all those who gave their blood in the 200 years of Greek independence so that Greece is what it is today. Also, we have to honor the Philhellenes. And by Philhellenes, I mean also those who supported the revolution of 1821 and the Greek War of Independence. But Philhellenes is a movement that transcends time. So we have Philhellenes before 1821, we have Philhellenes even today, and we owe all of them a big thank you. This is a part of honoring. Then we have to remember. We have to remember why we fought, what the War of Independence meant, what an independent state meant for Greeks. We have to remember the sacrifices and the pain that went into this struggle. We have to remember how many failed struggles we had before that, and how many successful fights the Greek people gave in these 200 years of independence. And then we have to learn. And this is the most important part. Learn from the mistakes, learn from the failures, also learn from the successes. When one studies the War of Greek independence, it's easy to find that the Greeks went from the top to the bottom of success. There were times that we really managed very well at the beginning, the liberation of Moria, Peloponneso, Dervenakia, all these. Even in defeat, like in Messaloniki, it was a great moment. But also we had great failures. We should not forget that before when the Battle of Navarino took place, then it was the Greek Revolution practically was next to failure. And why? Despite the big successes, the sacrifices, the pain, the military successes, we ended up very close to failing. And it's because we fought with each other. One of the saddest parts of the Greek War of Independence was the civil wars within the main war. And this is a lesson that we have to learn, that we can achieve the best things in life, the best things in history, when we are all united. And in this unity of purpose, it's very important to add another factor: unity of purpose, vision, determination, readiness to sacrifice. All these that make the Greek people as successful as it is overall. We mean the Greeks of mainland and the Greeks abroad. We are in the United States, and it will be a complete blindness if we don't underline the role, the assistance, the crucial role, I would say, of the Greek diaspora throughout these 200 years, starting from the beginning, starting from 1821. Φιλική εταιρεία was the one that started all. And Φιλική εταιρεία was based on the Greek diaspora. It was the money of the Greek diaspora who helped at the beginning of this struggle. And throughout 200 years that followed, the role of the Greek diaspora was crucial, was important, more than important, and it entails unity of purpose, as I have already said, in order to achieve what we all aspire to. A Greek state which is free, independent, democratic, rule of law, human rights respect, what we have today, and we hope to keep for the generations to come. The role of Greek American organizations like the American Hellenic Institute is crucial, it's very important in this quest, and I would like to thank you all for doing what you do. You do a great job. We count on you, and I'm very honored to be included in a lot of your programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. And of course, Madam Ambassador, given her very busy schedule, will not be able to be with us the entire time. But we certainly understand that. We wish you good luck with all your deliberations regarding 1821 and all the various activities you're going to be participating in. And we wish you a lot of success in those endeavors.
Thank you.
Nasa Gala. And now we will turn our attention to the meat of our program, and that is our first panel. The program calls for the moderator to be James Marketos, an attorney here in town and a longtime board member of the American Hellenic Institute. Unfortunately, Mr. Marketos will not be able to participate today. He's come down with a very slight illness, nothing major, not feeling very well, was not up to it. So yours truly will act as a pinch hitter today in the moderating role. I was hoping to take the day off, but unfortunately, that wasn't to be. Some of the ground rules. I will not be getting into any detailed bios of any of the speakers. You have them via the various emails that we've sent out announcing the program, so you can peruse the very distinguished biographies of each one of our presenters today. So without also the Q&A will take place at the end of the panel, that is to say, after each presenter has spoken. And each one will speak for approximately 20 to 25 minutes. And then at the conclusion of that, we will open up to a Q&A. And I certainly encourage all our participants who are viewing us today to submit your questions via the Q&A option at the bottom of your screens. And if any one of our presenters goes beyond the time limit, I will pull the hook. I will put you on mute. Just kidding. So without any further ado, once again, a great pleasure to introduce Professor Kitroeff, who will speak on the topic, the Greek War of Independence in Perspective. I guess it would be a good idea to put the historical context of what we're discussing here today. So Professor Kitroeff, you're on.
Thank you. Thanks again. I think I have the most easy as well as the most difficult task among all the presenters, because I've got to provide the cornerstone and give an overview of the Greek War of Independence, which was also the Greek Revolution. And it was a revolution that began in 1821 and ended in 1828. So I will do my best to give this general overview. I will share my screen and go to my PowerPoint presentation. And for the purposes of trying to summarize this vast topic, my presentation is divided into three parts. I want to discuss the causes of the 1821 revolution, remind you of the main events, and then discuss the consequences and the meaning of 1821. The first cause was a general intellectual current that was sweeping through Europe at the time. We call it the Age of the Enlightenment. It's a transition from the old theocratic way of thinking into understanding the role of through secular lenses, looking at the role of individuals and rationalism and science. That does not mean, of course, that religion was displaced, but there was a fusion between the Enlightenment and religion, especially in terms of the way the Greeks proceeded, as we shall see. The two bookends of the Age of Enlightenment, as far as the Greeks are concerned, are Iosipos Misiodax and Adamandios Koreis. Iosipos Misiodax was the earliest thinker, and it's particularly relevant to mention him in this context because Misiodax was the first thinker who expressed a view of Greekness that went beyond religion. He went beyond considering Greekness as Greek orthodoxy and thought of the Greeks as a geographical entity. And he talks about the Greeks being a diaspora of Greeks. And that, of course, remains to today when we talk about Hellenism being something, an entity which is both in Greece and beyond Greece. It's the founder of this thought is Iosipos Misiodax. Of course, the best known is Adamandios Koreis. Adamandios Koreis is the major Enlightenment thinker who, in a sense, prepared the way for the Greek revolutionaries. We are speaking about our conference being an interface between intellectual thought and policy. Dare I say it, Koreis did exactly the same thing. He is the thinker who spoke about the need for the regeneration of the Greeks, the regeneration based on the principles of ancient Greece and on the Greek language. Based in Paris, he witnessed the French Revolution in 1789 and wrote in terms of translating the messages of the French Revolution in the Greek context. The other major intellectual and practical and political movement that was sweeping through Europe and America, of course, in the late 1700s, we describe as the Age of Revolutions. And we call it the Age of Revolutions to distinguish it from earlier uprisings. And we know, of course, that the Greeks engaged in uprisings before 1821, especially in the late 1700s. But the Age of Revolutions, thanks to the American Revolution and thanks to the French Revolution, instilled in people the notion and the understanding and the belief that an uprising can actually lead to political and social change, the way it did in America, the way it did in France. People then saw those two revolutions as a model. And Rigas Ferreos, known also as Velestinlis, was the Greek thinker who we associate very closely with picking up the baton, as it were, continuing the traditions of Korais and imagining an uprising in the Balkans. He had a broader view of the uprising in the Balkans, and he was the victim of the Ottoman authorities, who realized that of the dangers of his programmatic statements about Greek liberation. On my slide here is a wonderful Theophilos painting which shows Korais on the left and Rigas Velestinlis on the right, in a sense lifting Greece up through their ideas. A fourth cause, a more direct cause, was the Philiki Eteria that Ambassador Papadopoulou mentioned. It's a secret society established by Greek diaspora merchants in 1814 in Odessa, Russia. It spreads through to the diasporas in Central Europe, funds, prepares the revolution quite practically, and many members of the Philiki Eteria moved to Greece and are actively involved in the uprising of 1821. And the fourth direct cause, a more practical cause that was also important and we should mention, is the infighting of the Ottomans. On the right, you can see a well-known figure of Ali Pasha, Ali Tepenelli. This is from the Dupré gravure volume that came out in 1825. 1825, the journey to Athens to Constantinople. Ali Pasha was a warlord who clashed with the Ottomans, attracting Ottoman troops to Epirus, which gave an opening, a vacuum of power in the southern tip of the Balkans, which was the opportunity for the Greeks to launch their uprising. Moving on from those four causes, we can now go on to the actual events of the revolution. We have the first major event is obviously the outbreak of the revolution, but we have this characteristic that we have two sets of revolutionary outbreaks. One is in the Danubian principalities, present-day Romania, led by Alexandros Ypsilantis, who we see here on the left. He's actually wearing the insignia of the Philiki Eteria. The uprising was put down by the Ottoman troops at the Battle of Dragatsani, which you see on the left. But the other uprising in the Morea, as Peloponnesos was known at the time, was ultimately successful. And of course, the figure to which we attribute the success was the strategic genius of Theodoros Kolokotronis. Many others, of course, fought heroically, but Kolokotronis, in a sense, is the leader of the revolution. And the slide you see with the white flag with a cross is a depiction of the event of March 25th in the Agia Lavra monastery in Peloponnesos in Kalavrita. The actual revolt, of course, began in Kalamata on March 17th, but for reasons of national pride and acknowledgement of the role of religion as well, Greece officially celebrates the outbreak of the revolution on March 25th, referring to the Agia Lavra event, which of course is also an important, as we know, religious holiday in the Greek Orthodox calendar. My next slide, I want to just take us back and just just locate us geographically, because before I go on to the other events. I mean, I know this is a contemporary map of Peloponnesos. Believe me, it's easier to use contemporary maps to understand what was going on in 1821. Basically, the Greek War of Independence is a series of battles around fortified towns. The towns at the time were fortified, and basically the revolution was a struggle over who would be able to control the major towns in the Morea. And that is why I'm bringing out this map. The town of Nafplio was taken by the Greeks. As I said, Kalamata was also conquered by the Greek forces. Tripoli in the middle of the Peloponnesos was the most significant one. The Greek forces under Kolokotronis took Tripolitsa, as it was known at the time, and basically that consolidated Greek control over most of the Morea. The siege of Tripoli was a bloody affair. The Greek War of Revolution was a bloody affair, and we should say this on both sides. This was warfare in the early 19th century, no holds barred. We think about the heroism, but we also have to acknowledge the type of fighting and the bloodshed that was taking place at the time. Just north of the Morea was the town of Messolongi, which the Greeks took, but Messolongi remained under siege up to 1826, but it also played an important role in the proceedings. As I said, we have the early Greek victories. This is a painting on the right by Panayotis Zographos, one of the heroes of the revolution. Makriyanis commissioned this popular painter to depict the major events. This is the Battle of Tripolitsa. As you can see, the Greek forces have surrounded the town. Tripolitsa, Nafplio, Kalamata. I should mention Athens was also fell into Greek hands, was liberated, but there was a particular situation there because the Ottoman garrison remained on the Acropolis right through to the end of the revolution. Another important element in the Greek success throughout the 1820s was the dominance in the seas, over the seas, thanks to the maritime islands of Hydra, Spetses, and Psara. The slide on the left is Andreas Miaoulis. Andreas Miaoulis is, let us say, Kolokotronis's counterpart. He was the admiral of the Greek fleet, an Ithriot captain and ship owner who led the successful Greek naval operations against the Ottomans. The middle slide, I think many people will recognize, is Konstantinos Kanaris, the captain, the seafarer from Psara, who developed a particular way of attacking the Ottoman fleet by having boats full of dynamite side up to those ships and blow them up. It's a wonderful depiction of what was going on at the time. I believe I can call this, it's Greece's David and Goliath moment, in which the small Greek boats destroy the powerful Ottoman fleet. On the right is a slide. Again, it's a depiction from the Dupré album of 1825, and it's a young Ithriot. Hydra, of course, was the most important of the maritime islands, with apologies to Spetses and Psara. He does seem somewhat nonchalant in Dupre's book, but he's probably already contemplating the Greek maritime superiority that Hydra offered the Greek Revolution. The Greek successes came with bloody Ottoman reprisals. And we have the massacre of the island of Chios, and then the slaughter of the inhabitants of the town of Messolongi when they attempted to break the siege in 1826. Messolongi, of course, was very important because the great Philhellene, the British poet Lord Byron, was in Messolongi. He died of bad health before 1826, but his presence in Messolongi was a source of great inspiration for Philhellenes throughout in Britain and throughout Europe. These are three paintings by European painters. The middle one is a depiction of Byron by the Italian painter Ludovici. But the two paintings on the left and the right are probably the most well-known and most important and most significant in raising the consciousness of the Europeans about the conditions of the Greeks and the difficulties of their struggle. The one on the left is of the massacre of Chios. The island of Chios was razed to the ground. Its inhabitants slaughtered. That's the painting on the left by Eugène Delacroix, the French painter, and it's also Eugène Delacroix's depiction of Greece on the ruins of Messolongi as well, a depiction of Greece as female, very much part of the times. The French Revolution generated paintings that depicted France as a young, innocent woman. The same applies here to the painting by Eugène Delacroix. And these massacres and the wave of Philhellenism throughout Europe also sparked the concern and the interest of the great powers. And after holding back for several years, remember the revolution starts in 1821. In a few years after the Greek victories, by the middle part of the 1820s, we've got two events which threaten the consolidation of Greek power. The first is the civil wars that break out among the Greeks, which the ambassador mentioned. You know, from a sociological point of view, it's not totally strange that these civil wars, as they're called, or infighting, I would call them, happened. In a sense, the Morea and the Roumeli, the Sterea Elada, the mainland Greece, as we call it, which was north of the Morea, which are the two areas where the revolution actually got consolidated and took hold. There were uprisings around 1821 in other parts of the Greek-speaking world, but it was in Morea and in Roumeli where the revolution continued. Morea and Roumeli had completely different social structures, and in a sense there was not very much contact between the two, and therefore it's understandable that certain rivalries broke out. There were local rivalries in the Morea as well between the notables and the chieftains. So a great deal of the infighting had to do with a particular makeup of Greek society at the time. The other event was even more threatening, of course, and that was the arrival of a joint Ottoman-Egyptian fleet. Egypt was semi-autonomous at the time, but the Sultan persuaded the leader of the the viceroy of Egypt, Muhammad Ali, persuaded him to send his son Ibrahim to Peloponnesos to put down the revolt. The Egyptian Ottoman fleet put down revolts in the islands of Khasos, Crete, and then their action in the Peloponnese almost meant the rollback and the defeat of the Greek revolutionaries. Nonetheless, the Greeks held on, and in a sense, we can think of the heroic perseverance of the Greeks throughout the 1820s that persuades the great powers to move in. And they send their fleet to blockade the Ottoman Egyptian fleet in Navarino on the western side of the Peloponnese. This is a Panayotis Zographos painting. This is my favorite. Most of the other paintings, and Navarino generated a lot of paintings, but they're mostly close-ups of battleships. This one gives us the geographical layout of Pylos in the Western Morea, with the Ottoman fleet in the bay and the great powers fleet, first of all blockading them, and then throughout, by virtue of the naval battle, sinking the fleet and ensuring the victory of the Greek Revolution. Those are the main events. I selected the very few important ones. And now let me turn to the consequences and the meaning of 1821. Throughout the fighting and the events that we looked at, there were 3 constitutional assemblies held by the Greeks, which produced blueprints of democratic governance and definitions of Greekness. And this is a very significant element of what was going on. It reminds us that the revolutionaries were looking ahead to a free Greece and a free democratic Greece, hence the 3 constitutional assemblies and the various definitions of Greekness, which changed over time, but there was a sense of openness and birthright rights were given to everyone on the Greek territory that was fighting for the Greek Revolution. Eventually, definitions of Greekness would change from the Greek state. But this is the one significant thing, that we have a political process going on. The second thing is that the 1821 revolution was not momentous only for the Greek people because it led to the freedom of the Morea and Roumeli and the maritime islands and the creation of a modern Greek state, but it had a resonance globally. There were other uprisings in Southern Europe at the time. We did speak about the Age of Revolutions. There were others who were inspired by the Age of Revolutions. But the Greek uprising, which becomes a revolution, is the only one that is successful in the sense that it leads to an independent state. Another important consequence and meaning of 1821 is that it's the first time a nation emerged from within the Ottoman Empire. And I was a graduate student in England sitting in a seminar in the Middle East Center at Oxford University when a notable Middle East scholar spoke about the importance of the Greek Revolution for the rest of the Ottoman Empire, which we don't usually think of. The Ottoman Empire collapsed a century later, and of the vast areas of the Ottoman Empire that covered North Africa and the whole of the Middle East and the Balkans, the first nation to break away from the Ottoman Empire is Greece. And that gives the significance of the Greek Revolution for all the other peoples who were under Ottoman rule at the time. With the arrival of Ioannis Kapodistrias, a diaspora Greek who was selected as governor, he was selected as governor in the third of the constitutional assemblies, Greece embarked on a post-revolutionary process of state building. The state building process was a great challenge. We know that Kapodistrias was assassinated after several years because of the infighting that continued. The process of state building was also accompanied by the need to incorporate the other Greek-speaking areas around the Morea, the Roumeli, and the Maritime Islands, and we have the emergence of the Great Idea. So 1821 and its successful conclusion in 1828 gave the Greeks their independence. It was the beginning of a process that would be completed a century later, but the important thing was that by 1828, a segment of the Greek people were free and they created their own government and their own nation state. Thank you. That is my overview. My colleagues will now take up the various themes that I have mentioned, especially the American dimension, and enlarge upon them. Thank you again.
Well, thank you, Professor Kitroeff, for trying to put together in a half an hour the concepts of the Greek War of Independence. And as you say, now we'll get a little bit more into the weed discussion here. And with that, we're going to turn to our next speaker, who will speak on the Proto-American Philhellenes of 1821. And that is Dr. Constantine Hatzidimitriou, who has taught at various universities in the New York City area, and most recently at Queens College Center for Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies. He is currently working on updating his book on the American involvement in the Greek Revolution. So he's keenly astute in terms of the subject matter that he is about to explain to us. So Professor Hatzidimitriou, we give you the floor.
Thank you, and I have to commend Professor Kitroeff. Visually, what a spectacular PowerPoint. Mine is much poorer. It is basically my notes, which will prompt me for the presentation. I don't have the visuals that he has, so it's really a pleasure to see what can be done. I am not that adept at technology, as you'll soon see. So hopefully the PowerPoint will come up. Is it up? Does everybody see it? Yes?
No, we don't see it. Emily?
Okay.
Have you shared your screen? Have you used the function down at the bottom?
I thought I did. Let me close this and go back, share the screen. And
There we go. Looks like it's coming up. Great.
great. Okay. Like I said, I'm technology challenged. Let's see what I have here. Okay. So my presentation is basically about American Philhellenes and their involvement. You'll see a theme that runs through in that my argument is that the philanthropic aid that America sent to Greece really was the most significant of everything that took place. And I know that the political dimensions will be discussed by someone else, but I will talk about these aspects. And Emily, the text is being blocked by the pictures. Can I close the pictures or not?
Yes.
How do I do that? Just push this on the top?
Yes. Try and see if you're able to.
I see here. Okay, right. So, what was the state of America and Americans on the eve of the revolution? So, there's a comprehensive study of American involvement with Greece by Stephen Larrabee. This was published in 1957. And you'll also see that what I do is I will call attention to the research, the state of the research on these subjects and what needs to be done. So Larrabee's book is really a fundamental work that outlines this early involvement. And not many people have dealt with these subjects since Larrabee in the detail that he has. I published a little piece about a connection between Paul Revere and Gates's wife, who was a Smyrniot, and argue that there may have been, she might have been the one that tipped off Paul Revere that the British were coming. So I called attention to these early American connections. And of course, John Paradise, whose house still stands in Williamsburg, Virginia, was well known as a tutor of Jefferson and an early Greek in the United States. Several Americans traveled to Greece prior to 1821 and have left us their journals. The two most important and complete are Nicholas Biddle, 1806, and Edward Everett in 1819. Everett was the very important Philhellene, the leader of American Philhellenism, and I'm going to talk about him in a moment. But I just want to point out that it's fascinating to me that Everett's journal is published in Greek, but has yet to appear in English. It's still in the manuscript at the Massachusetts Historical Society. So when the war broke out, who was there? Missionaries, merchants, especially in Constantinople and Smyrna, sea captains, and a few tourists. Some of these have left us descriptions, and there's a wonderful multi-volume work in Greek by Simopoulos, Pos Idane I Xeni, how the foreigners viewed Greece in 1821. Even Lafayette, the great hero of the American Revolution, reached out to Gallatin, the American ambassador to France, on behalf of the Greeks early on. Later, he traveled to America and made speeches on behalf of the Greeks. President Monroe's address in December 1822, expressing sympathy for the Greek struggle, captured the popular imagination. And this public address began debates in Congress on Greek aid and recognition, as our next speaker will elaborate upon. However, I believe that Everett and the Everett-Korais connection, and Professor Kitroeff has already talked about Korais, was ultimately more important because Everett launched a national media campaign that stimulated massive public support, and he constantly used his political influence to try to get the United States to aid Greece. In fact, common Americans did much more for Greece than the US government. Who was Edward Everett? Edward Everett is the leader of American Philhellenism. He studied at Harvard, and he became a professor of Greek literature there. He became president of Harvard. He's known as the greatest orator of his time. And he was also a senator, a government, a congressman, an ambassador, secretary of state, an abolitionist leader, as many of the other Philhellenes in America were. And many years later, he was the main speaker at Gettysburg, although everybody remembers Lincoln's much shorter speech than his. He was a great Philhellene, and that I've already called attention to his connection to Korais. He and Daniel Webster led the Massachusetts Grecians in a national effort to support Greece from Boston. He was also the editor of the North American Review and contributed to many other publications. Throughout the war and thereafter, for his entire life, he never stopped helping organized aid for Greece. And his efforts saved thousands from starvation and death through American philanthropy. Yet 200 years later, we still have no study done focused solely on Everett and Greece. Hopefully some young person listening to me will take up the various topics that I'm going to call attention to that need work. Lighting the fire, I call this. The appeal of the Messenian Senate at Kalamata, May 25th, 1821. I want to read a little piece of this because it always gives me a thrill to hear it. And hopefully someone in the audience will feel the same way. Through Korais, local leaders in Greece appealed directly to America for aid. And I'm quoting a little piece of it. To the citizens of the United States of America, having formed the resolution to live or die for freedom, we are drawn towards you by a just sympathy, since it is in your land that liberty has fixed her abode, and by you that she is prized as by our fathers. Hence, in invoking her name, we invoke yours at the same time, trusting that in imitating you, we shall imitate our ancestors and be thought worthy of them. We esteem you nearer than the nations on our frontiers. The bonds of gratitude and fraternity will forever unite the Greeks and the Americans, an alliance founded on freedom and virtue. Korais sent this appeal to Everett in July, and who made certain that it was given wide publicity and stimulated public support for the Greek struggle. There's a lot more in it, and when people read it at the time, it really captured their imagination, and it underlined the unity between America's revolution and the Greek struggle. Everett was not alone. There were many other Philhellenes leaders throughout the United States, especially the movement was centered in New York, in Philadelphia, and Boston. Here you see Nicholas Biddle of Philadelphia, along with Matthew Carey. They were the leaders of Greek Fire in Pennsylvania. In New York, you have Samuel Ward, H.D. Sedgwick. He also worked with many others. William C. Bryant helped raise funds, the famous American poet. A warship was built in New York, which sailed to Greece and fought in the war as the Elas, the famous frigate affair. One of our speakers will elaborate more on that as we go along. Reports of the Greek struggle reached the American press from the very beginning. Even before the Messenian appeal, newspapers all over the US covered the Greek struggle as one of freedom-loving Christians struggling against the brutal and despotic Ottoman government. The Greek struggle reminded the American public of their own war against tyranny, and they identified with the Greeks. During this time, there was a slogan, Washington in 1775, Ypsilanti in 1821. The press called it Greek fire or Greek fever, and it soon spread all over the country, from the northeast to western and southern frontiers of the US. Women, as Dr. Santelli will tell you in the program tomorrow, who's written a recent book about all this, played a major role in this movement. But it was really very, very popular, and it captured the imagination all over the country. When the horrors of the massacre at Chios in April 22 were widely reported, this stimulated even more public interest. And this took the form of many people calling themselves Grecians. Soon thereafter, surviving children from Chios, the so-called 40 orphans, were brought to the United States by missionaries, ship captains, and Philhellenes, and shared their stories of survival to local groups throughout the country. So what were the parts and the components of this grassroots movement we call Greek Fire, and they called Greek Fire? Well, Grecian fundraising committees were created by prominent citizens in communities throughout the United States, and many of these were connected to churches, and women's group played active roles. They held fundraising balls, sometimes in revolutionary garb, and they invited local 1776 heroes to attend and speak on behalf of the Greeks. Remember, the American Revolution had occurred about 45 years earlier, so there were still lots of people around that remember the revolution, and some of the old timers who fought in it and were part of its leadership took up the call to aid the Greeks. plays and concerts were held, and original Grecian air songs, that's what they called them, Grecian air songs, were composed and performed, as well as recitations of original poems. We have a lot of poetry that was written at the time. Botsaris, Bubulina, and Canaris became household names in America. And William Cullen Bryant wrote a poem called The Greek Boy, among others, all about one of these orphans from Greece that came to the United States, who graduated from Columbia College and was heavily involved in promoting Greece throughout his life. Lectures by prominent Philhellenes, such as Everett, were given on Greek subjects and the war. Public displays were created to attract attention and raise funds. For example, a women's group in Brooklyn, New York, raised a 20-foot cross inscribed with the words, "Sacred to the cause of the Greeks." Students at many schools and colleges donated funds and passed resolutions of support. Merchants donated portions of their profits to support the suffering Greeks. Many of the so-called Greek orphans who were brought to the United States to be educated helped with fundraising. They appeared on stage in Greek costumes and gave dramatic speeches. One group later recalled that they were shown around like a bunch of baboons. Dramatic slave narratives were published about the suffering of Greek men and women and their escape from captivity, and portraits and engravings of both Greek heroes and heroines were circulated all over the country. Greek Flyer initially was about sending aid to Greece, and the aid went through London, and it was primarily monetary aid, and those monies were then passed on to the Greek government. However, after almost 5 long years of warfare, as Professor Kitroeff just pointed out, liberty still looked elusive, and starvation, disease, and misery had become commonplace throughout Greece. Even the army and navy could not feed and equip itself, and brigandage and piracy were rampant throughout the land. The American press began to carry reports that the war was not going well, that the Greeks were divided, fighting among themselves, and they were looking to European powers for support, even if it meant accepting monarchy instead of forming a democratic republic. I already mentioned the frigate affair, which was a scandal at the time, and there was a movement where Greece was losing support, and reports about the money being wasted came back to America, and fundraising started to decline. However, it was at this desperate period that the American people made their greatest contribution to Greece's struggle for liberty, actions which led and organized by 3 American heroes who were there and saved thousands of lives. That's a portrait of Byron. It's one I could find handily about Philhellenes. There are about 25 Americans who went to Greece during the war as volunteers to fight or support philanthropic efforts. Little is known about most of them, and none have been studied in detail with a focus only on their activities in Greece. 3, however, stand out among all the rest for their contributions and their sterling characters: George Jarvis, William Peckham Miller, and Dr. Samuel Gridley Howe. But before turning to the 3 most important who went to Greece, let me say a few words about the others. And I'm not going to talk about all of them, just some of them that we know a little bit more about. 2 former officers of the U.S. Navy, John M. Allen from Kentucky and Richard W. Ruddock, arrived in Greece in 1824. Allen stayed in Greece and fought with distinction with the Greek fleet in several battles. He also played a minor diplomatic role for the Greeks in London and kept in touch with the Greek committee in New York. Although he remained in Greece until 1828, he was disliked by the other Americans, and not much is known about him beyond that date. Much more is known about another Philhellene who went to Greece, who had a very famous name, Lieutenant William Townshend Washington. He was a distant relative of America's first president and a Virginia native. After attending West Point, he served in the Army and then left to go fight in Greece, supported by the Boston Greek Committee. Like Allen, he was brave and fought with distinction, but was disliked by the other Americans because of his grandiose manner and constant scheming to do great things. He also involved himself in Greek politics and became closely associated with the French party in Greece, which supported monarchy. When his schemes came to nothing, he renounced his American citizenship and further alienated himself from the other Americans. He died in Nafplion on July 18th, 1827, from a wound he suffered while attacking a rival Greek faction. Railing at his native land and wishing her every misfortune. He was about 22 years old, and there's a portrait of him, which I was not able to find, but I had seen in the past. And Samuel Gridley Howe, in his journal, summed him up this way: thus ended in a civil broil the wild, nay mad, course of a young man whose superior talents, education, and address might have given the most reasonable hopes of a brilliant life and honorable deeds. He was brave but unprincipled, and his unbounded vanity swallowed up all of his other qualities. Merritt Bowles from Ohio spent several months fighting in Greece and then returned home and wrote about his experiences. There was also an American doctor from Kentucky who brought his special, the Kentuckians had these long rifles, and he fought in some battles, and he learned to appreciate the Greek style of fighting because he tried to fight the way they did in Kentucky, and that didn't work, and he almost got himself killed one day. Three more will be mentioned: George Brown, an officer, and two seamen, George Wilson and James Williams. Brown served in the Greek Navy as a lieutenant, and Wilson was the first gunner in the Greek fleet who displayed such courage during the Battle of Lepanto in 1827 that Lord Cochrane publicly drank to his health. Last but not least, we must mention James Wilson, who was an African-American, ladies and gentlemen, from Baltimore, who Miller met when he was recovering from wounds at the American hospital, meaning Wilson was recovering from his wounds. Dr. Howe established a hospital on the island of Poros in 1827. Wilson had come to Greece with Lord Cochrane and served as a cook aboard one of his ships. But during the Battle of Lepanto, when no Greek could be found to take the helm, he volunteered and was wounded as a result. After his hospital stay, Miller took him home with him and helped him regain his health. Wilson was already a veteran, a distinguished veteran, having lost a finger fighting with Decatur off Algiers. So far, we know little else about his subsequent actions in Greece, or if he survived the war. Let me turn to the three major Philhellenes that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to begin with George Jarvis, who all of the other Americans looked to as the leader of the American Philhellenes in Greece. What you see here are some of these items that that Howe and Miller brought back to the United States from Greece. They are from Byron, and Jarvis was instrumental in helping save them, and they went into the American hands and eventually found their way in the United States and were used for fundraising activities all over the country. Jarvis was the son of an American diplomat from New York, and he was born in Denmark. He arrived in Ivrea, Greece in April 1822 and joined the Greek Navy as an officer. While aboard various ships, he participated in 13 naval battles, including going to Chios after the massacre. He learned Greek extremely well and adopted Greek dress and customs. He was the most assimilated of the Americans who went to Greece, and eventually he was known by all the Greeks fighting as General Zervas. He fought in many land battles as well, including Argos and Missolonghi, where he also served as an adjunct general to Lord Byron, and where he trained Suliotis. When Byron died, he was entrusted with distributing his assets, and that's why these items that are there. Now, that is a document. You can see his name, Yorgos Zarvis, written up here. I was able to find it online. It is a document that was issued to him by the Greek government so he could travel, because he didn't even have a real passport. Jarvis was wounded several times and impressed everyone with his courage and daring. He never took a salary and supported his band of 45 fighters on his own, rising to the rank of lieutenant general. He also fought with Karaiskakis and Nikitaras in Attica and never took sides in any of Greece's rivalries or civil wars, unlike young Washington, for example. He was beloved by all and even became a godfather to one of his soldiers' sons in a Greek way. He also went to Crete with a Greek American from the United States, where they supported revolts against the Turks. From 1827 onwards, he and his men supported Howe and Miller with the distribution of food, clothing, and medicines from America to thousands of starving Greek women, children, and the elderly and disabled. On more than one occasion, he saved supplies from pillage from brigands, and even from Kolokotronis, who tried to seize American supplies for his own troops at one point. He died of illness in Argos on August 11th, 1828, and was buried there in the courtyard of St. John's with the highest honors. Jarvis has left us a remarkable journal in Greek, English, and German that was published in the 1960s by a scholar by the name of Arnakis from the University of Texas. He started a series, Americans in the Greek Revolution, and he published most of Jarvis's journals, and he also published a version of Howe's history of the Greek Revolution. But unfortunately, despite all of this material that we have, except for the introductory material that Arnakis gave us in the 1960s, and I admire so much the pioneering work that he did, we still have no single study of this outstanding Philhellene. And that's a dissertation and a book waiting for someone to work on. There's certainly enough material. William Peckham Miller was known as the Yankee Daredevil. That's a contemporary portrait of him there. Miller was born in Randolph, Vermont, and he served in the Army during the War of 1812 and studied law. With the support of the Greek Committee of Boston, he traveled to Greece and arrived in Missolonghi in November of 1824. And he was lucky. He had the good fortune to meet Jarvis almost immediately, who helped him greatly, taught him Greek, and taught him how to survive and fight and really operate in Greece. He was made a captain in the Greek army and eventually rose to colonel. Like Jarvis, he never took a salary and raised his own funds. He fought in the Battle of Missolonghi and escaped shortly before it fell. His reports and letters to America were widely circulated in the newspapers and helped raise funds to support Greece. In June 1825, Miller was with Jarvis and Howe at the Battle of the Mills in the Morea, where they were surrounded until, with the help of Makrianis, they fought off the Turks and won the day. His courage there earned him the Greek nickname of Daredevil. I don't recall the beginning of it, but Diabolos was part of it. Miller returned to Vermont in 1826 and was asked by the New York Greek Committee, that's Miller again here, to return to Greece and supervise the distribution of food and supplies to starving Greeks. This is a unique aspect of American philanthropy. No other country sent life-saving supplies to Greece and made certain that people there, Americans there, protected those supplies and supervised, along with the Americans on the ships that brought them, to make certain that they went to the most needy people and they were not stolen or misused. He returned to Greece in 1827 aboard the ship Chancellor and collaborated with Jarvis and Howe to distribute supplies to thousands of destitute Greeks in the Morea and the islands. He remained in Greece and aided with the distribution of these life-saving supplies that 8 ships brought all over this period of time. There may have been more, but 8 are documented in Larrabee from Greek committees in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. My estimate is that over 150,000 starving and destitute Greek women and children were saved from starvation and death by these life-giving supplies. That is a story that is not given enough attention and needs to be better known in America when we talk about the Greek Revolution. Like Jarvis and Howe, he also kept a journal and used it to publish a detailed accounting of his experiences distributing American aid for the New York Committee. His actual journal and archives remain unpublished. And again, we have no detailed study of Miller at all. And his published book on the condition of Greece during that time is basically an accounting, because the Greek Committee in New York wanted him to make sure that they got their money's worth. And so he gives you in great detail where the goods were distributed and where people gathered and how many were there and the costs involved. When he returned to Vermont in 1828, Miller brought with him a young Greek boy that he adopted and renamed Lucas Miller. Lucas eventually moved to Wisconsin and became the first Greek-American congressman. W.P. Miller, the elder, the father, continued to fight for freedom in America. He became a distinguished abolitionist and continued to fight for the freedom of enslaved Black Americans in the United States, as he had for freeing the enslaved Greeks. Dr. Samuel E. Gridley Howe is often considered the greatest American Philhellene. Howe was born, and this is a contemporary portrait of him in his Fustanella. Certainly we have descriptions that Jarvis dressed exactly the same way, if not more, and Miller also. There must be a portrait of Miller somewhere. I don't think anyone has ever found any sketches of Jarvis, but all of this research needs to be done. There's really a lot of work to do, folks. So he was born into a distinguished family. One of his ancestors was dressed as an Indian in the famous Tea Party during the American Revolution. He attended Brown and then went to Harvard Medical School, where he graduated in 1824. Inspired by the poetry of Byron, he decided to go to Greece and offer his services to aid in the struggle. Edward Everett and the Greek Committee of Boston gave him letters of introduction to prominent Greeks. He arrived in Napoleon in 1825 and joined the Greek forces as a military doctor. By April 1825, Howe had been appointed surgeon of the Hellenic forces and participated in the Battle of Neocastro, where he met Jarvis during their retreat. He fought again at the Battle of the Mills, along with Jarvis, and Miller, and then went to the island of Hydra in June to care for wounded. After participating in a campaign in Crete, September 1826 finds him in Napoleon as the chief physician at the war hospital. During this period, he wrote many letters home about his experiences, which were published and helped stimulate Greek support. At the end of October, he was appointed chief physician aboard the steamship Kateria under Captain Hastings and attempted to lift the blockade of Athens. Like Jarvis and Miller, he never drew a salary. Throughout this period, Howe remained in constant contact with Everett in Boston and sent moving descriptions of the suffering of the Greek people that were circulated and helped stimulate American philanthropic aid. In 1827, Howe left his military duties and along with Jarvis and Miller, distributed relief supplies from various American ships that the Greek committees in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia was sending to Greece. Like his comrades, he also kept a journal of his experiences, which was eventually published, not all of it, most of it, after his death. Thousands of Greeks were again saved because of the work of these three Philhellenes. And if I have time, I can read you a little bit of their eyewitness account.
Unfortunately, Dr. Dimitriou, we don't. We have to wrap it up. So try to wrap it up if you can,
I'll
please.
wrap it up. In 1828, he returned to America and engaged in a national speaking tour to raise support. And he used the Greek children with him to help people understand the plight of the Greeks. Howe was unique in that he also believed that the Greeks should be given the means to help themselves. He founded an American hospital on Poros, and he established a colony, folks, named Washingtonia near Corinth. It's a fascinating story. He also supervised the building of an American mole, which is still there in Aegina, orphanages, schools, and other philanthropic institutions. In 1830, he went back to America and he became famous as a reformer, and he founded the Perkins School for the Blind and supported the abolition of slavery. He was one of the Secret Six that supported John Brown. In 1867, he returned to Greece and supported the Cretans in their unsuccessful bid for freedom. Howe never forgot Greece and continued to be an active Philhellene his entire life. Like the others, we have no detailed study focused just on his actions in Greece. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you for not giving me the hook. Let me
Almost.
almost. I'll do the stop sharing now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dimitriou. Obviously, Philhellenes have played an integral part in Greece's modern history, maybe no more so than the revolution itself. Now moving along to the last presenter of today's panel on the subject matter, the President and the U.S. Congress, Ideas and Policy, is our own member of the board and volunteer legal counsel, as he likes to identify himself as, and that's Nicholas Karambelas. Mr. Karambelas practices in the areas of business entity organization, international law, and business transactions and e-commerce. But after getting to know Nick for all these years, and I won't say how many years, I think he really is a closet academic, because I think he practices law, I think, from 7 in the morning till midnight, and from midnight till 4 in the morning, he delves in research and all sorts of matters regarding, to Greece. And this is one of his hobbies regarding the Greek Revolution. So it's a pleasure to have him with us today and to talk about a very important component regarding the Greek Revolution and that of the official channels of the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government. So Nick, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick. It's always a pleasure to speak at AHI events because AHI, the late Gene Rosides, gave me my first job in Washington. So I worked at AHI for about 2 years. And so it's always a pleasure working with the staff and the board over many years. my focus, my discussion is going to be on the Greek cause in the US government. And by US government, I mean the presidency and Congress. The two important documents in this regard were the Monroe Doctrine and the Webster Resolution in Congress. These are usually glossed over, and they were basically failures in connection with the Greek cause. But the truth, as in most life, is a little more complicated. What I want to do, though, right now is to set the historical context in which the American Philhellenism arose. And picking out just four subjects, it's the decision makers, obviously. It's the international events that were happening at the time. And then the socio-cultural, popular culture sentiment at the time. And then the politics of it all. Let me just go through the decision makers. James Monroe was our fifth president. We don't learn a lot about James Monroe in high school because he came after the four giants: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. But he was important with regard to the Greek cause because he was president at that time. He was an officer in the American Revolution, distinguished himself in the Battle of Trenton. His mentor was Thomas Jefferson. He inherited a plantation, was a slave owner, and was a very mediocre, probably a bad planter and businessman. So he went into politics and ultimately went governor, senator, and became president in 1818. John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, was his Secretary of State. He was the son of President John Adams, and he got his diplomatic experience at a very young age because he accompanied his father to Europe and served as his clerk when Adams was there negotiating the peace with Britain, the arms and material loans from France. So he's very experienced. He later, of course, became president. And then when he lost his second election, he became a member of Congress and actually died on the floor of the House of Representatives giving a speech. Daniel Webster, an ardent supporter of the Greek cause. He was what we would call today a white shoe lawyer, represented very important interests. And he was for recognition, that is for the United States to recognize the Greek state and to aid the Greek state and to fund an American commissioner to Greece. Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House, also an ardent Greek supporter, Greek cause supporter, and was very important to Webster in terms of the resolution because, and it's even true today, nothing of any importance gets on the House floor for a vote unless it goes through the Speaker and the Speaker approves. Then there were the international events, and a lot of international events just serendipitously coincided at the same time. The one major one was the revolt of the Spanish colonies in South America against Spain and establishing their own republics, independent republics from Spain. The republics, though, were still vulnerable because it's not just the Greeks who fight against each other. Each one of those countries had the conflicts and contravening factions. I should mention in this regard and note, there was an admiral in the Argentine Navy who fought against Spain in favor of Argentina. His name was Nicolas Jorge, but his last name was Colmagnatis, and he was a sailor from Hydra. And if you go to Hydra today, you'll see there's a monument to him there, but he was a very prominent admiral in the revolutions against Spain. The other event at that time was the Congress of Vienna. Now, Napoleon had been defeated in 1815, and the empires which had defeated him formed the Holy Alliance, which was meant to control any revolutions in Europe. It was meant to preserve monarchy and oppress, shut down Republican-style revolutions. The members of the Holy Alliance were Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Great Britain, although it was on the side against Napoleon, never joined. The Ottoman Empire, of course, because of the religious connotations, never joined, but the Ottoman Empire supported most of the objectives of the Holy Alliance. In 1822, the Congress met again in Verona, and by that time, the Greek War of Independence was in progress, and at Verona, they condemned the Greek War of Independence, said, no, there can't be a Greek state, forget it, and encouraged actually the Ottoman Empire. What are you going to do about this? Get rid of these guys. Then the socio-cultural influence. Obviously, all of the educated Americans at that time were steeped in the Greek and Roman classics. All of each of the men I just mentioned were all steeped in the Greek and Roman classics and drew inspiration from them. Slavery. This was the beginnings of the abolitionist movement in the United States. That was very important to the Greek cause because the abolitionists opposed oppression anywhere and were very much attracted to the Greek cause. There were the forerunners of the Transcendentalists, later on Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau. There again, the Transcendentalists stressed free will. Not oppression, not repression, but every individual had the right and the obligation to act out of his or her free will. We've mentioned the distance in time between the American Revolution and the Greek War of Independence. However, I submit that the American Revolution ended in the War of 1812. There were many issues that were never resolved in at the end of the American Revolution. So the memory of the American Revolution was really only a few years before the Greek War of Independence. Politics. There was also obviously the beginnings of international trade. American shipping began its international trade, and the commercial shipping in the Aegean, in the Eastern Mediterranean, North Africa, was very important to the American mercantile class. Politics. Monroe's presidency is named in the history books the era of good feeling. Well, it was anything but that. That was a name that journalists who supported Monroe wanted to call the era, saying, oh no, this was a good time. It was a good time for everybody. Well, it was the beginnings of the development of our party system, which we have today. The founders were very of our state of the United States were very much opposed to parties. They viewed that to be one of the problems with the British Parliament. Well, by the time of Monroe, the party system was developing. It was non-institutional. It was very ad hoc, but very caused a lot of tumult. Finally, the politics, the political parties, the neutrality laws. Okay, that was the beginnings of what we came to be called isolationists and liberals. Isolationists said, you know, let's stay out of, and it was the beginnings of the Monroe Doctrine. Let's stay out of world affairs. We got enough to do back here at home, and unless we're attacked, we shouldn't be involved. Okay, that's the context. So many of these things coming together at the same time. Let's go now look at the two documents. The Monroe Doctrine. It was actually written by John Quincy Adams, the Secretary of State. It was really directed against the Holy Alliance. President Monroe and other prominent Americans believed that the Holy Alliance was going to lead the way back into the Western Hemisphere. And we're very concerned about that happening. John C. Calhoun, a senator from South Carolina, who was Secretary of War under Monroe, believed that a war was imminent. The other thing about the Monroe Doctrine, it's kind of misnamed. As I said, it was written by Adams, and it didn't come to be called the Monroe Doctrine until 1850. Let me just go through the 4 points that are relevant to our discussion that the Monroe Doctrine contained. Number one, the US will not tolerate any act by a European power to come back and recolonize a country that was already a republic and independent. Number two, the US would not tolerate any act by European power to come and form new colonies in the Western Hemisphere. The US, kind of in exchange, would not interfere in issues that arise between European powers. And the United States would not interfere with any colonies of the European powers in the Western Hemisphere that already existed. So obviously the Monroe Doctrine has been modified, reinterpreted, adapted over the 200 years. Each president, we always hear a president, well, I'm issuing the Truman Doctrine, or I'm issuing the Kennedy Doctrine, whatever it is. But obviously national security, defense, other issues modify the Monroe Doctrine as it existed back then, but it is still a mainstay of US foreign policy, at least in principle. Okay, let's look at specifically the Monroe Doctrine and the Greek cause. In 1822, President Monroe gave his State of the Union address and expressed moral sympathy with the Greek cause, expressed the debt that the United States owed to the ancient Greeks, but he did not call for recognition or aid in that address, okay? Secondly, the second event was that the US Navy had been sent into the Aegean, was there to protect American shipping. And in fact, American shipping had been attacked by pirates who took refuge in Mykonos. And the American ships went in, told the Greek notables of Mykonos, you return those pirates to us and the booty that you stole from the American merchant ship, or we're going to level the town. Fortunately, I guess no one remembers that now. In any event, the Greeks took those two events, the 1822 State of the Union address and the presence of the Navy, as good omens that the United States was moving toward recognition and aid. In 1823, they dispatched a Greek notable named Andreas Larigakis to seek recognition and aid. Larigakis, through various channels, communicated with John Quincy Adams, and made his case as to why the Greek cause needed recognition and aid. Well, Adams, being the good lawyer that he was, responded, look, of course we're in sympathy with the Greek cause. Of course we give moral support to it, but supporting the Greek rising and a Greek state could be viewed by Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire, as an act of war, because we're supporting a revolt against the Ottomans, and only Congress had the right to declare war. I know that sounds quaint to us now, but that's the way it was back then. Adams did, however, as he was obligated to, submitted the request to the cabinet, Monroe's cabinet. They debated this issue for a number of days. Albert Gallatin, who was the Secretary of Treasury, was very much in favor of recognition and aid. As I said before, John C. Calhoun, who was the Secretary of War, also was very much in favor of it. And the Samuel Southard, who was the Secretary of Navy, also in favor of it. And President Monroe himself was in favor of it. John Quincy Adams opposed it. He gave his arguments that I just gave. He gave the argument that, well, Greece is just at its beginning of its uprising. We don't know what's going to happen. There's not an independent republic there for us to recognize, as there was with the South American republics. Well, the cabinet couldn't come to a decision. Okay, so by pretty shrewd maneuvering, the cabinet and Monroe said, "Hey, John Quincy Adams, you write the formal response to Larigakis." Well, Larigakis, of course, Adams, of course, gave what told him in a formal sense what he had already told him, and that the cabinet kind of went a step further and said the cabinet will not approve this. Well, the cabinet was deadlocked. It wasn't that they didn't approve it, but that they were deadlocked. However, Adams said they didn't approve it. Technically correct, maybe, but not factually correct. So that's where in the next State of the Union address that Monroe gave in 1823, the first draft of what came to be known as the Monroe Doctrine included recognition and aid. Monroe said, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. He was an ardent Republican and very much in favor of the Greek cause. Well, John Quincy Adams saw the first draft and said, you can't do this. You can't put it in these terms. Do not do it. Well, that first draft, that portion, was excised out of the what would have been the Monroe Doctrine. What became the Monroe Doctrine, then it would have been in there. Again, using those same arguments. It was unconstitutional. There were no republics. And he added one other argument by this point. It would harm commercial interests of merchants, Boston merchants, New York merchants, and he needed those merchants because he was on his way to running for president in 1824. So he had a parochial political reason for opposing the Greek the Greek cause in the Monroe Doctrine. Well, Daniel Webster, who, as I said, was in Congress at the time, he was an ardent supporter of the Greek cause. He communicated with his friend, John C. Calhoun, and Calhoun had seen the first draft of the Monroe Doctrine, but not the final draft. So Calhoun told Webster, don't worry about anything. Recognition and aid will be in the State of the Union speech. Well, they weren't. Webster became livid and said, okay, I'm going to introduce a resolution, a joint resolution that would require the executive to recognize the Greek state, the fledgling Greek state, and appropriate money for aid and to fund an American commissioner. Shrewdly, Webster did not, he introduced the resolution in, let's say, middle of December of 1823, but he said, I don't want debate on it for about 6 weeks, towards the end of January. And he did this because he wanted to mobilize support, public opinion support, the type of support Professor Hatzidimitriou referred to also just to have the public opinion out there, but also to pressure congressmen with their constituencies. We mentioned Kentucky earlier. Kentucky was an ardent supporter generally of the Greek cause. The Kentucky state legislature passed resolutions. Come on, Congress, support the Greek cause. Well, at the end of that period, the debate started. Webster's debate was the best orator of the time. As a matter of fact, it has been said of Winston Churchill's speech in Parliament, in which he said, we're not going to negotiate with Adolf Hitler. We're going to fight on the hills, the shores, that speech. And it was described as Churchill having mobilized the English language and taken it into battle. Well, that's what Webster's speech did. It began a fierce debate in Congress. Calhoun, who was again Secretary of War at the time, he corralled his group of Southern congressmen. This group probably knew very little about the Greek cause, but the point of John Calhoun's opposition, whatever he thought about the Greek cause, he despised John Quincy Adams. And he despised John Quincy Adams because Adams was fervently anti-slavery. And so anything that Calhoun could do to embarrass Adams was great. The Greek cause, no problem, as long as it embarrassed Adams. It's not clear what went on between Adams and that group of congressmen, but in all fairness to Adams, he never deviated from his position, even though, as he was told, as 1824 progressed, he was told, look, you're endangering your presidential aspirations. So you better think about what you're doing. Well, Adams didn't budge a bit. There were some introductions of kind of compromise language. Webster, by friends of Webster and friends of John Quincy Adams, neither of them would budge. They wouldn't change a comma. So there was the debate. The debate themselves, they're available in the congressional record. It's fascinating, the arguments that were made. But the bottom line is, and the way the resolution was introduced was a motion to consider the resolution. That's procedurally how it happened. It basically works that same way today. So it failed. The motion failed, and that was the end of it. We mentioned the frigates earlier. Let me just quickly say the book that Professor Hatzidimitriou mentioned, Larrabee's book, its subtitle is The American Experience in Greece. Well, the frigates should be named The Greek Experience in America. And the reason is the Greek government had dispatched a delegation to buy, actually it was originally 6 ships, only 2 ended up being made, and Greece only got 1 of them for an exorbitant price. And that was the Hellas, made it to Greece, really didn't see all that much action, and eventually was mysteriously scuttled. But let me conclude by this. We talk about the American influence in Greece for the Greek cause, but there was a Greek influence in America. The debate in Monroe's cabinet, the debate in Congress over the resolution was the first time that the United States, as a policy matter, faced the issue. How do we draw the balance between our ideals of liberty, democracy, nationhood, and the realities of the world? National security, military, commerce, our diplomacy. Even after 200 years, that is still the issue in our foreign policy. And that was launched, that was set off by the Greek cause as it was debated in our government. Apologists for Erdogan have said, well, the US and Turkey must conclude a grand bargain. They use that term. Well, this is simply another way of saying the US must draw the balance to which I just referred to the benefit of an authoritarian Turkey, which opposes the very ideals, denigrates them, the very ideals which that balance is meant to address. It reminds of the statement of Uncle Joe Stalin. FDR referred to Stalin as Uncle Joe. He said, Erdogan might as well be saying, what is mine, and what is yours is negotiable. As it comes down to it, our foreign policy is not made just by the president, as it says in the Constitution. It's made by an intermediation of president, Congress, think tanks, public opinion, press. So we, as citizens, have an influence on where that balance is drawn, and I hope we use it. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. And thus began US-Greek relations that we carry on to this day. Well, look, we have a number of questions. I should have made it a point that the questions should not be answered individually by any one of our speakers. But I know some of that took place, but we will reiterate some of those questions so others can hear the questions and the answers. We do have a number of, we still got ample time for some Q&A. Hopefully get more questions in, otherwise it could be a shorter Q&A. But let me begin, if I may, with Dr. Kitroeff, and if you can please unmute Dr. Kitroeff as well. I took it upon myself to try to get a little better educated regarding this the 200 years and the actual independence fight. And I was reading Sinclair's book, So Greece Can Be Free. And it is about as convoluted a book as anything I've ever read in terms of really trying to understand the beginning, the middle, and the end. And you come to a conclusion that there was really never a proper beginning to the Greek War of Independence. There was a lot of problems in between, and even the end is still ambiguous. And maybe some would claim it's still not even to this day complete. But be it as it may, you had forces, you had the Philikiteria in the capitals of Europe that gathered mercenaries on the ideal of ancient Hellene and that whole aspect of what ancient Greece stood for, and persuade them to come and to fight for the Greek cause with money, manpower, and others. But yet, as was discussed here earlier in some context by the presenters, things in Greece were anything but what these people thought when they first landed in Greece. There was these captains that were fighting, within different regions, some within themselves. Professor Hatzidimitriou talked about how one had to fight against Kolokotronis, and how, in essence, not all of Greece was interested in this cause. I mean, the massacre that took place in Chios, my understanding was that the Chiotis were not necessarily willing to go along with the fight for independence, including some of the clergy, if you will. So in the end, how did all this thing ultimately come together? How did it get coordinated? And was it really just by pure accident that the independence took place?
Well, it wasn't by accident that the revolution took hold in the Morea. That was the area where there was greater unity and more opposition to the Ottomans at the time. When we think of the entire Greek-speaking world at the time, which was spread out into other regions, the prospect of taking arms against the Ottomans was rightly quite intimidating. As you mentioned, the island of Chios off the coast of Asia Minor, close, relatively accessible from Constantinople and the Ottoman fleet, it would have been very risky to engage in any opposition against the Ottomans. And north of Chios in Lesbos as well, they were Mytilene, they were disinclined. So Peloponnesos was an area precisely because of the Ali Pasha movement in Epirus. There was such a vacuum of power in Peloponnesos and a will for the uprising. The maritime islands joined because the maritime islands had prospered very much during the Napoleonic Wars. And after 1815 and the Congress of Vienna, when the wars were over, then the islands experienced a downturn. So the islands and Peloponnesos had political and economic motivations to rise up. The other regions had local uprisings, but they didn't really take hold. That's why we have the southern part, we have Rumeli and the Morea in revolt, and the other areas either not in revolt or attempting a revolt that was put down. Yes, it was chaotic precisely because, as I said, there were different, the structure in Peloponnesos between the primates and the captains was different from the one in Rumeli. So there had to be a great deal of negotiation. The Greek people were broken up into separate geographical and administrative regions. So there wasn't really a Greek unity there. That was forged later on. There's a famous thing that has been said about Italy when Italy unified in the second half of the 19th century. We have made Italy, now we have to make Italians, in other words, join up the country. There's a famous book about France a century after the French Revolution with the wonderful title From Peasants to Frenchmen, and shows the process of consolidating the French Republic. So the Greeks as well they were differently placed differently, administratively, economically, socially, ethnically. Some were speaking Albanian, some were speaking Greek and Albanian, some were speaking Greek, and so on and so forth. So it's you have what you've outlined is the cup half empty. The miracle is that the rest of the cup was filled and the revolution was successful in the end.
Well, yeah, thank God for that. Dr. Hatzidimitriou, let's move to another question, please, because we do have a number of questions. I have one for each one of you, then I'm going to go to the Q&A. We decided to take a trip today. We pack our bag, we drive to the airport, we get on a plane, comfort. A few hours later, we're at our destination. These people in America, these Philhellenes, and we're talking back in 1820. This wasn't exactly a journey for the faint at heart. Okay, to cross the Atlantic, God knows in what conditions, to go to a foreign land and to go fight for a cause. That, in their minds, was it pure romanticism? Was it the tradition of ancient Greece and the moral sympathy, I think, as Nick Karambelas talked about? Ultimately, there wasn't a Greek-American grassroots community here, creating all this. The news is not instantaneous of what's coming out of Greece via email or Twitter or phone or anything else. What drove these people to do what they did? And thankfully they did, and went back even a second and third time and did what ultimately established hospitals and dispersed the aid that was given and so forth. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Yes. Well, having read, many of the accounts of the Philhellenes, the American Philhellenes, I can tell you that, and I alluded to it, not everybody stayed. Several are known to have come, found the conditions very harsh, and went back home. Not only did they go back home, they went back home and wrote about it and said, these Greeks, they're not who you think they are. They're crooked, they're dirty, they're shifty, and they don't deserve our support. But the ones who stayed were essentially romantics and idealists, and they put their ideals above their self-interest. I made a point of always mentioning of the three principal American Philhellenes that they never drew a salary. They supported themselves, and they wrote back and they said, look, if you're thinking of coming here and getting paid, don't come. Not only will you not be paid, but you're going to have to support yourself. And all three of the journals that I've read are impressed with the fact that the Greek people would not give up. The language is almost identical. You almost think that they copied from each other. And the same for a lot of the Americans who came on those ships to distribute aid. They were impressed that these ragtag warriors with very few resources, half starved, were taking on one of the great empires and armies of the world. And they would not give up. Remember, the Greek War of Liberation, and there are reasons why I call it the War of Liberation, and I avoid the contemporary term revolution. And War of Liberation is they got liberated from the Turks, but society did not change in a revolutionary way, and that led to all kinds of other issues. But the Philhellenes all write about how impressed they were with the average Greek, whether they were a soldier or just in the countryside, that they would not give up. And apparently that also impressed the Europeans, because really, let's face it, if it was not for European intervention, chances are they could not have continued to hang on. And it was the European intervention that made all the difference. And that's why they ended up with a monarchy, which certain factions didn't want. And certainly the Philhellenes in America were not in favor for.
Thank you. Nick Karambelas. In 74, when Turkey invaded Cyprus, a lot of the blame, rightfully so, was placed on one Henry Kissinger. and having a view of the world within the context of realpolitik. Well, in 1821 or during that era, there had to be some version of that, I would assume, as well, as it related to Turkey. This was a mega empire, as Dr. Hatzidimitriou just talked about. They had occupied Greece for 400 years. Colloquially, that's what we put in terms of the number. So can you speak to what the relations with the United States were at that time with, say, Turkey? And what was the reaction of Turkey regarding these speeches by Webster and others and these Philhellene movements of trying to help Greece?
The relations were as follows. I mentioned John Quincy Adams, how opposed he was to the Greek cause. But at about that time, he had sent a secret agent to the Sultan to sound out whether a treaty of commerce and amity could be concluded to protect American shipping, which used the port of Smyrna. The individual whose last name I believe was English was a convert to Islam. So he seemed to be the right person to send. So all during this period, there were attempts to regularize the commercial relationship between the Sultan and the United States. And there were various attempts, even the British, the Boston mercantile interests sent their own envoy to the Sultan and came back with a report to Monroe and then subsequently Adams about what was possible and what wasn't. Well, one of the reports came back saying, look, all we have to do is give them money and we'll get whatever we want. But in terms of formal diplomatic relations, there was very little.
Okay.
Can I just add one more thing? You mentioned Cyprus and Kissinger.
Yeah.
Let me just point out briefly. Back in 1821, the foreign minister of Austria was a person named Prince Metternich. Prince Metternich was a person of great interest to Henry Kissinger in Kissinger's writings. And Metternich at the Congress of Verona, which I mentioned, totally dismissed the Greek cause and wanted it eliminated. There's more to it, but you get the drift.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we know of despots throughout history. If we take from history, including the famous quote of one Adolf Hitler, who said, "Who remembers the Armenians?" So next, we'll go to some of our questions here that have been submitted by our audience. And I'm going to just take them one at a time here. This person writes, if Ioannis Kapodistrias had been assassinated, would it be reasonable to say that Greece had been made better? Does that make any sense?
Had not been assassinated, I think.
Yeah. Anybody want to take that?
Well, Alex, I think that's yours. I have a comment.
I defer to the professors.
Go ahead, Gus, and then I can.
Well, one thing that you have to understand is what Greek society was like at the time. Scholars who have studied Greece in the 19th century and thereafter, the latter part of the century, have pointed out that local interests clashed with central interests. So basically what you had was a society that was very much localized. And Kapodistrias, he wanted to exercise central control. And he clashed with the local interests who felt, hey, we fought the revolution for our own local interests. And the revolution was a complicated affair, as Greek society was at the time. And here you have this person coming from outside of Greece, and the heterochtones clashed with the people who felt that they were from Greece and not from the diaspora. So you had that aspect as well. So would things have been different? I think that there would have been some differences, but this fabric of society was really the underlying cause of the problems that Kapodistrias had and continued afterwards.
Quickly, Professor Kitroeff, you want to add something?
No, I agree completely.
Okay. I guess this is a Nick Karambelas question. What was the relationship between Kapodistrias and John Quincy Adams? That doesn't make a difference.
I'm not aware of a relationship between the two, but again, I'll defer to the professors.
Well, I'm aware of Kapodistrias being in touch with various Philhellenic organizations. So there is some correspondence between them. There were unofficial contacts between government elements. And you mentioned the Turkish context before. Remember, as this war was taking place, at the same time, the United States government, you have this Greek fire throughout the country. They're also negotiating with Turkey in secret for commercial agreements. I first met Gene in 1974, Gene Rosidis. And I feel I almost owe it to him. I've been investigating the diplomatic level correspondence in Congress between Turkey and the United States. And I'm convinced that the origin of aid to Turkey really begins during this period. In the first commercial agreement, which was negotiated and approved after the revolution ended, which established the formal diplomatic relations between Greece and the United States, there was a secret article about building frigates for Turkey and training Turkish military personnel, naval personnel. It turned out that Congress did not approve that little portion, but they found a way around it. And I've been reading in sources in the congressional record, which show that Turkey sent personnel to the United States for training, naval training. And in fact, an American frigate, as good or better than the one that was built illegally, by the way, that was the one time that Monroe did not intervene and American neutrality allowed it to happen, because it's illegal to build a warship for someone who you don't recognize and who's at war with a country that you're at peace with, but they allowed it to happen. That impressed the Turks, and they sold them a frigate in Constantinople, and then they established a naval presence in Constantinople. Individual American shipbuilders and naval personnel went to Turkey and really helped modernize the Turkish Navy. It's a very little known aspect of Greek, the Turkish and American relations. So I have it on my list of things to do. And if I manage to ever do it, life, of course, might intervene. I'm going to dedicate it to Gene Rosidis, because I respected so much his galvanizing our community in my lifetime, and doing so much in 1974 and thereafter.
Well, I'm sure he's applauding and thanking you from above. And of course, today we have what's called the Foreign Assistance Act and the Arms Export Control Act, when we choose to use it within the proper context of the law. A question came in. This person was enlightened regarding to hear about the American Philhellene movement and its struggles, against the Ottomans in support of Greece. And, she asked the question, basically, why isn't this better known today in terms of these Philhellenes and their fight for freedom in Greece? You alluded to it. I don't know if you want to expand to it at all, Gus.
Well, look, the basic study on Greek fire was done in 1930. A lady by the name of Myrtle Klein wrote her dissertation at Columbia University, and then it was published afterwards. Recently, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I received a 1930, 2020, 2021, I received a copy of Maureen Santelli's book entitled Greek Fire, which is the first time since then that an entire study has been done on this phenomenon. In between, you had excellent work done by Pappas, Rapoussis, and some others on aspects of this. But the whole, in my presentation, I probably was a little tedious. I kept emphasizing how we don't have a study on this guy. We don't have, work hasn't been done. The sad part is that we have ample material. There are voluminous documents, letters, aspects of the press. Professor Santilli's book expands what Klein started by really looking at the abolitionists and at the role of women. The women and their role in American society at the time was extremely important to this whole phenomenon. And she's the first one, unlike everybody else who's worked on it, except for Rapoussis, who's done some work, to call attention to this. So the long story, the long answer to a short question is we need a lot more work done on this. The material is there. And what I'm trying to do, and I think I may annoy some people, is if I can get people to harp not on these symbolic gestures, like the speeches that were made and this and that, and get them to understand that 100,000 people's lives were saved, that Americans, everyday Americans, not the government, but shopkeepers, people without a lot of means, contributed from idealism to this effort. And I see a parallel. I've been on your program before, talking about Smyrna in 1922. I would argue that the pattern continued. In 1922, once again, it was the people of the United States that proved themselves better than governments and commercial interests and power politics, etc. Always, have faith in the good feelings and good heart of the American people, as opposed to governments.
Oh, without a doubt. And quickly, because now I've got more questions I want to try to get in, but go ahead, Professor.
Let me just add very quickly. I read a book with my students about D-Day, and every country involved in D-Day celebrates D-Day differently, because countries really are interested in major historical events in terms of how it affects them. The Greek American community has been celebrating Philhellenism since the 1920s and the 1930s. What this work hasn't done, hasn't looked at Philhellenism and the Greek Revolution in terms of American history. The American public will be interested in Philhellenism if we can draw the connection between the Philhellenes and the broader context of American history. So every time we meet and we talk about our events, we say, why is 1821 Philhellenism not well known? Why is Smyrna not better known in America? Why is 1940 not, and the Orchidee not well known? Well, the American public will only relate if historians put it in the American context. And I think that's the value of Maureen Santelli's book, the recent one that Gus mentioned, is that she's gone beyond gathering the information, which is very important, relating it to she's made it part of American history. And that's what we've got to do. It's not easy, but that's how these events that concern us will become better known.
Well, not to belabor the point, Professor, but I couldn't agree with you more because a pet peeve of mine is I think there might be more written on the Philhellenes of this era than there was of the heroic stance of Oiki Day and how it was a turning point in the first victory of the Allies against the Axis. But that's for another day. Moving right along here, this is again, try to respond as quickly as possible because now we're running out of time, and I want to try to get all the questions in. This is not something I'm aware of. Who can expound on it? Why did Catherine's the Great Greek plan fail? Not even sure what that is. If that can be talked about in a few sentences, and what's the question? You know, is that the answer to the question?
Well, it's a plan to divide the Ottoman Empire up between Russia and the Habsburg Empire at the time. It was very bold. It had to do with great power politics at the time. I think if I remember well, the Austrian emperor, one of them dies, and the balances between the two change, and then the Ottomans decide to strike a deal. Where the Russians decide to strike a deal with the Ottomans, and the whole plan just is dead in its tracks.
Okay, we have a question by one of our moderator tomorrow, Professor Polivia Parara, and this is directed towards you, Professor Kitroeff. How would you comment on the argument that the values about democratic freedoms of the Greek pre-revolutionaries and revolutionaries derived mainly from their living experiences of the Greeks and their autonomous communities in the Ottoman Empire?
Yes, that's a great comment. Thank you for raising that. We know that throughout the period that the Greeks were under Ottoman rule, there was a tradition of autonomous communities being formed locally, and that's how we got the notables. So there was a tradition of self-governance, and I welcome this comment because it shows us that there was also an indigenous self-governing tradition. Of course, this was local self-government, so that, of course, runs into the issue that Gas Hatzidimitriou mentioned, that we had local interests prevailing at a time when we needed to open up nationally. But yes, we had a tradition of local governance through the communities.
Okay, and just like in Double Jeopardy, Professor Kitroeff, you're up again. And this is a question from a very distinguished former Cyprus ambassador to the United States, who now is currently residing in Athens with his wife, Pavlos Anastasiadis. He asks, beyond the appreciation of the resilience and heroism of the Greek revolutionaries, were there any geopolitical considerations that informed the critical intervention of the great European powers in 1827? Could you speak to that?
Precisely. I think these are connected. The resilience, the perseverance, the fact that the Morea and part of Rumeli were not going to subject themselves to Ottoman rule, suggested to the great powers, I believe, that they would be they'd be a source of instability for the Ottoman Empire in those particular areas. So precisely the perseverance became a broader geopolitical issue, and they make the decision, well, why don't we try and pacify that area by giving these people their independence? I've simplified the issue very much, but I appreciate the comment because it helps us understand the perseverance in a bigger geopolitical perspective.
And we have, this next one is just an FYI, which I will relay. And then I'm going to just ask each one of you to make a closing comment, and that will bring us to the end. This is from Dr. Angeline Balodimas Bartolome, well known to us at the American Hellenic Institute and our foundation, where she was a speaker for many years during our Future of Hellenism conferences, and will be included in our book on the same theme that the American Hellenic Institute Foundation will be publishing this year, over 450 pages worth of conference proceedings on that title. But she talks about Philhellenes, and she says, we have a Philhellene Society here in Chicago and have several events about this. I have been a keynote speaker herself, so next time we know, we'll bring her on to discuss the Philhellenes. In May, she says, there will be a ceremony where they're going to be unveiling a statue in Aurora, Illinois, towards the Philhellenes. And she also added, we're also entering the school systems and holding contests for essays on Philhellenism. Now, what does she mean by school systems? I'm not sure in terms of, she means, mainstream Cook County and surrounding the Chicago area academic institutions, or within Greek American parochial schools. But be it as it may, those are the questions that have been submitted. And we have a few minutes left, and we'll allow each one of our presenters today to make some closing comments, and we will wrap it up. Anybody?
I would just stress that, and this is directed towards the younger people out there, write your term papers, write your articles on Greek-related issues and Cyprus-related issues. The American Hellenic Institute has one of the best libraries in the United States on Greek, on books about Greek and Cyprus in English, and a lot of articles. Think along those lines. That will bring the independence, the Greek cause, to the level. I also hope that we have people in Hollywood. I hope people can see great movie themes in what we've discussed in the Greek cause, and later, of course, too.
Well, Gus, you want to say something?
Yeah, I would encourage people to join if they're seriously interested in aspects of Greek history. Join the Modern Greek Studies Association. It is the professional organization that studies the history of Greece in a serious way. It started in the late 1960s. I'm proud to be a lifetime member, and they hold wonderful conferences and publish important journals and other kinds of publications on Greek studies. I'm sure Alex would echo the sentiment.
And if I can go back and reiterate one of my themes, and I think we should close by, I would want to close by reminding everyone, 2020 vision, as we say, 2020 vision is always got an advantage, and ex post facto, it's easy to judge things. If we fell into a time warp and we went back into the early 1800s, even when the Philiki Eteria was formed in 1814, nothing was given. No one could have predicted the success of the Greek Revolution. So obviously we want to be critical, and we've been examining it with a critical way, but there was a miraculous dimension to what those heroic Greeks did. And it is the only revolution in Southern Europe that is successful, and it is the first country that breaks away from the Ottoman Empire. And it is a revolution that my two colleagues here have reminded us had a huge impact on America. And that is from a small part of the Ottoman Empire, thanks to the heroism of the Greek people. And I think that's the main message that we should remember.
Well, certainly the cry for "Give me freedom" or give me death" or "Give me liberty" is certainly the poignant outcry on that peninsula called Greece. And they fought themselves. They fought an enemy, but in the end, they were victorious. And we're not much better for it today. Not only us, obviously, because we're products of this, but the whole world itself, in terms of Greece becoming free once again, so it could be free. Tomorrow, we will gather for our second session, and we have some interesting welcoming remarks tomorrow and greetings. Yana Angelopoulos Daskalaki, who is the president of the Committee for Greece 2021, will be offering a greeting tomorrow, as will John Christolakis, who is the Secretary General for Greeks Abroad and Public Diplomacy, and who is head of Greece 2021 at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They will be our opening speakers tomorrow, followed by our panelists, led by Dr. Polivia Parra as the moderator. As always, I'd like to thank, let me also remind, Hollywood was mentioned earlier. There hasn't been too many American-made movies regarding the Greek War of Independence, but we do want to shout out the yeoman's work and great work that was done by Dean Mitropoulos and his wife, Mariana Mitropoulos, where they produced the film Cliffs of Freedom, which I believe it was introduced about 2 years ago and did appear in mainstream theaters across the country for a time. And we congratulate the efforts of Dean Mitropoulos and his wife, Marianne, for bringing the story to light. We hope more and more of these will take place on various subject matters regarding Greece and Smyrna and Ohide and the Philhellenes and so forth. I always want to thank our great staff here, Elias Yarasulis, our Director of Legislative Affairs, Yola Pakchenian, and Emily Pandas, who acts as a producer for our virtual programs. They do a terrific job, and we thank them. And of course, I want to thank our panelists today for taking the time to be with us, to spend so much time and to partake of their wisdom, to our audience. We thank you very much. And as always, we can't do programs like this and we can't function here without the support of our sponsors. So as we close out, we put up our sponsors once again on the screen. We thank them. And until tomorrow, we wish you a good afternoon and thank you for tuning in.